Today we're going to do a deep dive into kirimase's generate function, and we're going to do that by building a classic demo project, a to-do application. So what I've got here is just a blank Next.js project. I've also run kirimase in it. So if we look at our config file, I've installed shadcnui, drizzle with Postgres under the hood, and Next.auth for authentication. So why don't we start with our first, well, actually, let's run the dev server just to make sure that we can log in and everything is okay. So we've got the classic login screen. I'm going to go here, sign in with Google, use this account here, and you see that we've already run into an issue. Let's see. Oh, of course, because I haven't run the migrations yet. So let's first get our local Postgres server running, create a new database. We're going to call this todos, exit here. And then if we look actually at the package JSON, you can see that Kirimase has added these scripts right here. So we're going to run generate first and then migrate. So let's run bun db generate, bun db migrate. Great. So now if we run the dev server again, let's head back to the home page. Awesome. Get out of the dev tools. Sign in with Google, use this account. Now, great. This is what we expect. Everything good. We've got light and dark mode set up. This is all just the classic Kirimase initializing function and adding packages. So let's jump in with our first generate function. So we're going to run kirimase generate. If you're using a package manager or haven't installed it locally, you can run bun kirimase or bunx kirimase at latest and then generate. We'll wait for this just quickly to download. So this prompt gives us the option to add a model, a controller, and a view. We're going to select all of them here. We are then going to use server actions with Optimistic UI for this deep dive, but I may do another one with the TRPC and React hook form options installed as well, if that's something you want. Why don't we add the API route here? We're going to call this the table name todos. This has to be plural and in snake case. So if it was multiple words, you'd say to do items like that. In this case, let's call it todos. Then we pick our first field or column type. So this is going to be, let's call this content. Okay. I'm going to make this field required because we want that to be a required field. And then I'm going to add another field, and this is going to be our Boolean toggle for whether it's completed or not. So I'm going to call this completed. This is also going to be required, but the default is going to be false. And I think that's it. So no other fields, no index for now, but yes, I do want it to belong to the user. So you can see that quite a few files have been created for us. So we'll look at things here first so we can see on a macro level, and then we'll jump into each of the files. So first we have a schema. This, if you were using Prisma, would add the model to your Prisma schema. In this case, it creates a new file, a new TypeScript file that describes our model in for our drizzle ORM. We then create two, these are called service functions, or I've heard them called service functions, but these are a handful of already done queries and mutations to interact with your database. We'll see that more in a second. What do we have here then? We've got our API route that's created. So again, if you wanted to interact with this on an API layer rather than with server actions, you would do it there. We have our server actions that are created. We'll jump into the utils and see what's been added there, but that's just a I think it's one of the validation functions that's written into there. We then have a modal that's created, and this is a shared modal that will be used across any other models that you create. We then have well, actually, let's jump into these first. We've got a to-dos page, so that's a route for your to-dos. We've got a to-do list component, and that is, as it sounds, is the list of your to-dos and rendering that. TodoForm, that's for creating your to-dos. And then we've got use validated form. This is a hook, a shared hook that will allow you for nice client-side validations across your forms. And then use useOptimisticTodos, and this leverages the new features in React Canary, which allows you to have a very nice and simple optimistic UI across your application. And then finally, we are installing Shadcn UI components for the various views that we use. So a dialog for the modal, a form for the form, and a checkbox for the Boolean value. So why don't we just first run bun db generate to generate the migration, and then run bun db migrate, so we can just see that everything should work right away. So if I run bun dev and I jump over to localhost 3000/todos, and then we've got this nice UI ready to go. First to do, and I can create it like that. Easy as that. I can also update it. So if I hit save, say this is completed, great. You've got your CRUD operations already done literally in one command. So let's jump into what's actually been created under the hood. So I ran a git commit right before this so we could see what has been changed. So why don't we jump first into the lib file and into everything that's been created alongside the model. So if we jump into the schema, you'll see that there's this new file todos.ts. And if we jump in here, we remember that we had a field called content, and then we had a Boolean field called completed. Kirimase generated these two and then added an ID. I prefer the random UU ID for IDs rather than serial IDs. And so that is done for you here. And then because this belongs to the user, we reference the users table in the auth schema here, which is this one right there. So again, all of this referencing stuff is already done right out of the bat, already ready to go for you. There are then, we use drizzle zod under the hood to create types and schemas. And this is used for validation both on the front end and the back end. So in here, the basic notation that I've come up with here is that schema is for the back-end validation, and then anything with params is for the front-end validation. And that's why you'll see, for example, that there is ID and user ID that is emitted from that schema. And so we've got it for inserting, we've got it for updating, and then finally we've got this to-do ID schema, which is used for deleting any of these to-dos. And then we have types, and this is also used on the front end just for better DX and in general a nicer building experience. And then finally, this complete to-do, we'll go into this in a second, but this effectively gets the return type of one of the queries so that if you do have joins, which you're able to do with Kirimase as well, this complete to-do type will include any of those joins right away. So you don't have to mess around with any new types. So with that, why don't we jump right into the queries? So here, the queries are as they sound. These are functions that should be already done so that you can easily get all of your to-dos, as well as getting a to-do by its ID. So you'll see, because this belongs to the user, we first do a call to our authentication to get the session. And then it's a simple drizzle call where we get users, or we get to-dos where the user ID is the same as the to-do user ID. And then we return it as simple as that. And then for the get to do by ID, it's the same thing, except this time we pull in an ID, which we have nicely typed here, which you can see there. And then again, we can run that through one of the schemas that we generate with DrizzleSod, which is super helpful. If we then jump into the mutations, the to-do mutations, this is, for me, one of the really helpful generated files, because doing mutations properly and handling errors can be time consuming and quite error prone, particularly when you just want to get an MVP or something to get into your user's hands. You don't really want to be focusing on covering all of your bounds for errors. So I love this. So if you see, if we start, we've got create to do. Again, this is going to be as simple. It's CRUD. It's create, update, and delete here. So if you see here, we get the user session. We then pull in the to-do params. Because this is creating, we don't have an ID or a user ID coming in. So you can see that it's just content and completed. We then do a call to user auth. We run the parameters of the function through to or the arguments. I never remember that. We run those through this this insert to do schema that was created in the model file. And we pass in those parameters, and then we also pass in the user ID that we took from this session here. And then wrapped in a try catch, we've got the actual creation logic. And because this is assumed to be running on the server side, we can do the DB calls right from here. So you'll see in this case, we are inserting into the to-dos table this new to-do that is effectively guaranteed from here. And then we've got error handling here nicely in line as well. Same with updating, as you can see. And then finally, we've got deleting as well. So super helpful. So that's the model side of things. If we then jump into, maybe we go to the API route first. This is the to-dos API route. And we've got an error here, which I will have to look at later. This is just a classic API route, or route handler in this case. You'll see, again, it's quite redundant code, and that's why it's very nice to put it through a generator, because we're effectively taking the parameters, putting them, validating them with Zod, and then running some logic or some sort of DB logic here. So as you can see, if we go up here, we're validating, we're running the to-do, the service function. If there's an error, we return an error. Otherwise, we return the to-do as JSON, and then we revalidate the path as well. So the same with updating, and the same with deleting. So if we go now into the server actions, it's not called actions, sorry, it's called action/to-do. So if we jump in here, right off the bat, you can see we've got a use server notation at the top to ensure that this is working as a server action. We'll jump over this handle errors quickly and revalidate to-dos. So this is very similar to the API route. We just have these server actions that take in our input. Again, nicely typed. We run the input through our Zod schema, like always. I mean, this is effectively identical to the API route, just in a server action form, so it's much easier to call on your front end in in our components and then validate. And then in this case, we've got a nice handle errors function, which just returns the error nicely to the front end. So the same for update and for delete. So that's the controller layer. If we now head over to, let's jump into the utils really quickly to show you what was created there. Oh, and it's just these 5 or 6 lines that talk about that are a few types that we're going to use throughout the UI. So if we jump into the UI itself, we go to the to-dos folder and we head into page. Let's start from here. So this was this page that you saw here. We have got a revalidate just to ensure that this is a dynamic page. So every time you refresh, it will be revalidating cache. We first got a call to check auth, and this is very simple. It says it checks if there's a session. If there's no session, it redirects you to the login page. We then have one of these service functions that we call to get all of the to-dos. And then very simple markup that we then pass the to-dos into the to-do list component. So if we jump into the to-do list component, there's a lot going on here. First of all, this is a client component. And this may change in the future with partial pre-rendering. We may look at introducing a new component here so that we can leverage suspense. So that's ongoing. But if we start with the to-do list component itself, let's go down. And maybe let's start with the markup first so we can just see what's going on. We've got a div. This is the list, which is this here. And we've got a modal, and that is that effectively that plus this. Well, actually, it's not being rendered right now. As you can see, it's closed by default, but we've got a to-do form nested inside of it. So if we click the plus button, we open the modal. And then the modal state is effectively being passed down into it. So an active to do. This will become a bit clearer in a second. So we've then got optimistic to-dos. If it's equal to 0, which actually let's run the dev server quickly so I can show you what we mean here. Great. If I delete this, you'll see that we've got no to-dos here. So that's this component here, this empty state. Very simple. An H3 saying no to-dos. Get started by creating a new to-do. And then a button which sets the modal to open. That's this modal that's right here. You can think of the modal as really simple. It is literally just a pop-up. And then that's why it's a shared component. And then we're able to render anything inside of it that we like. So this modal here, all it takes in is an attribute of whether it's open, a function to set whether it's open or not, and then a title, which we've got here. So it's create to do when there is no to do selected, to do test. But if we were to open it here, because we have a to-do selected, it becomes edit to do. So then there's the to-do form. We'll look at this in a moment. We've already gone through that. And then we've finally got the optimistic to-dos. This sit within an unordered list. Our optimistic to-dos. If you haven't looked at the useOptimistic hook, it is a lot like useState. Except there are mechanisms built in when you effectively dispatch a new event to optimistic to change and update the optimistic to-dos. If it doesn't complete, it will revert back to the previous state. So you can think about this as just todos.map, and we'll go into that implementation in a second. So this is super simple React code here. We're just looping over the list, and then we have a to-do component. If we jump down into the to-do component, you'll see it takes in a to-do, which is typed as that complete to-do. So if there were any joins happening, you would have access to all of those attributes right away, no issues on the type. We've got some helpful just code here. So when we go into the use optimistic to-dos implementation, you'll see that while to-do is pending, it will update the state to either be optimistic or to be called the ID to be called optimistic, or for the ID to be delete when optimistic is either when it's being added or updated, and delete is when it's being deleted. And this allows us to manipulate the UI in that interim phase while the UI is optimistic. So those are just helpful for making the code more readable. So here, just simple Tailwind classes. And then we have the to-do content itself. So if we go here, that's the to-do content there. And then an edit button. And that edit button will then pass in this open modal function, which takes in a to-do. And effectively, if we go back to this function, you can see where is it? Right here, open modal. So we just set the modal to open, and then we set the active to-do to the to-do that's passed in as an argument to that function. And so that will then be accessed in the to-do form that you see right here. So when you also exit out of the modal, that's no longer an active to-do. And so when you were to click the button again, the modal and therefore the form is empty, and so it knows to create a to-do. And this allows for some nice reusable code, so you don't have a ton of different forms. So that was quite a lot. Let's jump into the use optimistic to-dos quickly, because that's important here. Where are we now? We're in the use optimistic to-do. We have a few types in here, but this is the meat and potatoes here, the use optimistic function. Basically what you need to know coming out of this is that you pass in, if we go back here, we pass in our to-dos into this use optimistic to-dos function. And then out of that, we effectively, you can dive into this code on your own time, but this is a lot like, what is it called? Like classic state management, where we'll run a switch on the actual action type, and then we will update the state optimistically based on which action is being done. So as you can see, like I was saying before, the optimistic to do is the data that we take in, i.e. the optimistic data, and then we update the ID to being optimistic. And that will return that function for adding an optimistic to-do, as well as the optimistic to-dos themselves. So, final point, let's jump into the to-do form, which is where a lot of the work is happening. So in this component, we pass in the active to-do. If there is an active to-do, again, this is this active to-do can be null. So this may or may not exist, and you'll see how that changes the to-do form. We have the add optimistic function. The nice thing with this implementation as well, with reusing just one form, meant that there was no need for prop drilling for that optimistic function, and there was no need for context as well, which was really, really nice. So if we jump into this to-do form, let's take a closer look. So we've got a lot of imports at the top. As you can see, we take in a to-do, which is optional, could also be null. Opening and closing the modal functions. And the reason why all of this stuff is optional is because this component is meant to be reusable, meaning that if you wanted to add this form anywhere else in your application, it would work immediately without having to have it in a certain context. It just might not necessarily, if you don't want to use the optimistic stuff, or you want it in its own route, you could do that. So let's start with errors. This was a cool thing that I pulled together, which is just a reusable hook. Again, I wouldn't really dive into all of this because it works, and it's a lot of TypeScript magic. But effectively, you pass in your to-do Zod schema as well as the to-do type, and then out it passes you errors, has errors, which is just a nice quality of, or DX effectively value for using on the UI, setting the errors, as well as a handle change. And we'll see how that's used in a second. We use Shatsian and their toast for updates. If you see that anytime we change something, you can see we get toasts that pop up there. And it's also to do updated. If we were to create something created, it's to do created. We can also see actually really quickly if we, actually we'll do that later. We then have is deleting just some state here to handle UI changes, and then use transition hook for UI changes as well. We also have the router here, and I believe that's for a router.refresh. If we look at it, yes, it's for a router.refresh in the onSuccess function. This most likely will no longer be necessary. Next has had some issues with caching in the last few months, and I know that they're working on that, and it should be sorted soon. So this probably won't be necessary. If we jump into this onSuccess function, this is a function that runs right after an action has been successful. And so you'll see it effectively, it takes in the action, which was in that util function. It's either create, update, or delete, and then some data. The data being either the to-do values. Well, actually, we'll go into this in a sec, but if data is passed in, it means that there was an error. And so you'll see an error string as well as the values. And that's what allows for if something doesn't go through. And we can actually simulate that right now. If we go to the to-dos action and we go create and we throw an error here, and we try and create something, maybe it has to be outside. I have to remember why this wasn't working. Oh, well, that's a bug that I will have to look into. That was working a few days ago, but I will take a look. So if we go back, basically when that was working, if you threw an error in the action, it would also hand that error back into the toast as well. And I think there's probably something I've done wrong here, and I will update that in the future. So we then have a handle submit function that's being run when we submit here, as you can see there. So if we were to see, we have errors set as null. And actually, to see these errors a little bit better, let's jump into the to-dos schema quickly. And one of the really nice things is because we're just extending the schema, everything is here. So if we were to say this is the schema, that the Zod schema that's been being used in that front end, as you can see, if we were to, in that validated form, you can see it's being passed in right there. If we then pass in, add a comma, and this is going to be content, and we say that this has to be a z.string.min, let's say 5. And we save this here, and we jump back here, if we start creating, you can see automatically we've got client-side validation already done. And we can even pass in a message if we want here. Message, and we say kirimase wants more letters, 5. And we go back. Look at that. So this is one of my favorite features. I love how quick and easy this is. And keep in mind, there's no form library being used here. This is all just plain React. And you get that amazing validation just right in line without really having to do anything else. So sorry, let's go back. Where was I? Yeah. So when you handle submit, again, this is blanked out. So we actually can't, with the client validation, we can't submit it. But what would happen here is that we would initially set errors as false. We then pull in the, maybe actually if we go to the markup first so we can see how it's being used. So it's a simple form here. We've got an action, which is that handle submit action. And then on change is that handle change function that we got out of the use validated form. So that's not relevant here. So if we jump back to that handle submit action, you'll see that we get in form data, which we have no idea actually what's there. So we run a quick object from entries to get the payload in an object format. And then we run that through our Zod schema, our front end insert Zod schema that we have here, insert to do params. If it is not successful, then we set the errors to effectively we can pull in the error object from Zod and pull out the field errors. And that's what we're getting when we get this here. And then we close the modal, or if close modal exists, i.e. if it's passed into the component, then we would close it there. And then we will pull out the values from the successful parsing of the Zod schema. And then in a try catch, we have, we start a mutation in there. Again, if add optimistic exists, and this is that nice, if you don't pass in add optimistic, none of this code is going to run. But if it does exist, then we pass in the values. We pass in just a blank user ID because it's not relevant here. And then if we are editing i.e. if we're trying to update the to-do here, we'll pass in the to-do ID. Otherwise, we pass in nothing. And then the action, again, if we're editing, it's updating. Otherwise, it's create. This is also all type safe, which is really cool. If there is, so we then run the appropriate action. So if we're editing, then we'll run the update to do action. Otherwise, if we are creating, then we just pass in those values, which are just the content and completed. This will return an error or nothing. So if an error exists, then it will pass in the error. Otherwise, it won't do anything. And then we run that on success function. So if there is, as you can see, if there is an error, it will pass in that formatted error. Otherwise, it won't pass anything in. And then finally, just a catch, and this will set the errors on the form. Okay, so that was a lot. And then this is just plain markup for each schema field. You'll see that there is content. So that was one of our fields. There's a label and an input. And then you'll see if there's any errors, that's an error object that's being returned from the use validated form. If there are any errors, then update the styles accordingly. So that's that ring that's around the side. And this was done to follow the way that React Hook Form handles errors. But you can do this as you like. It's all available to you there. So yeah, that's really the markup. And then finally the delete button, which this shows up. The delete button exists if you are editing, i.e. if I think in this case, I've done it. If there's a to-do ID, then you're editing. Otherwise, there wouldn't be. So if we go back down there, I think we're right here. Yeah, if we're editing, then show the delete button. You'll see that it doesn't exist when we're here, but when we are in the edit, it exists there. Simple button, again, it's disabled if either we are in the process of deleting, if we are pending, or if any errors exist. And so the is deleting is that use state, which you'll see just below here, 8 lines below. The pending is the use transition hook, basically the attribute that's passed back from that hook, and then has errors is passed back from us from the use validated form hook. Very simple button here. On click, set deleting is deleting to true. If close modal exists, close the modal. This, similar to the handle submit above, is just trying to make things feel super snappy. So you can see that if we were to head to the network tab, disable cache, and go on slow 3G, and if we try and delete, you'll see the modal closes immediately before the action has completed, and then once the action has completed, you'll see that then it gets deleted. And so this just makes for a really snappy experience, something that feels more native-like, and you don't have to wait for things. This caching is just happening on the dev server. Don't worry about that. Cool. So again, this is like all the other things. If add optimistic exists, run add optimistic, run the server action, return the error, update it to not deleting anymore. If there's an error, format it, and then pass it to the onSuccess function. All right. Very last thing is the save button. And this is what allows us to get this animation that's right there and changes to saving. It's really fast, but I think it really improves the experience. This is using a simple use form status hook. It's in a separate component, and it allows, it taps into the form status. And so if it's pending and we're editing, set is creating, otherwise set is updating, and that will just change what this button says, saving, or well, you see we can't do this, but you'll see this will change to creating. Nice. So that is everything. This was a lot longer than I had expected it to be, but I think that kind of proves that there's a lot going on here. So very last thing I want to do is I just want to show you how cool all of this code was created for us in literally seconds. And it means that we don't have to focus on any of that we can be happy with and get right to building features. So if I, for example, want to have just a button, rather than having edit here, I'd like to just have a button to either toggle the to-do is completed, and that's it. Like that. Usually, if I was building a brand new application, I would think, okay, I need to write the service functions. I need to create a button. I need to blah, blah, blah. For me, all I have to do here is know that I've already got the update service function. So really all I need to do is, and I've got the action, the update action already done. I just need to jump into the list component and add a button. And when that button is clicked, update the button. And that's it. So if we go into the to-do itself, let's go into the item. Let's in here, let's add a new button, and let's say mark complete. And maybe in here, we're gonna just pull in the to-do.completed status. So now we can see that if to-do completed, then we want to say completed, otherwise not completed. Okay, Cool. So that's not completed. You'll see if we were to update this, this would say completed. Cool. Let's just improve this button because it annoys me like this. Again, we're thinking on a UI level. We're not necessarily thinking about all the boilerplate underneath it. So let's add an outline here. That looks good to me. I think I want to actually remove the edit button as well. Oops. So that we don't have that in the way. And then let's just make this flex call. Sorry, not just regular flex, and justify between. Nice. Okay. So in theory, when we click that, we want to, let's actually, rather than mark complete, let's say toggle complete. Last thing that I want to do here, I want to say that if todo.completed, I want to say bg red or bg green 300, let's say, and then otherwise nothing. Nice. So that looks really bad, but it gives you an idea of what we're trying to do here. Let's actually, last thing, let's add some padding of, let's say 4, rounded, medium, and then items centered, just so everything is centered. Cool. So that's a little bit better. Maybe very last thing, outline, primary, foreground. Yeah, okay, fine. That looks okay to me. So when we click toggle complete, we want that to change. So all we'd really want to go in here is add an on click. And in here, we're going to say update to do action, pass in the to do. We want to we want to spread the to do in there, and all we want to do is change completed to do to the opposite of to do dot completed. This is also async, so we're going to want to add async in there. Let's just, for good measure, wrap that in curly braces. And now let's see if it works. So it does work, but you'll see what happened here is that we didn't update the optimistic to-dos. So all we're going to do in here, I think we're going to have to pull in the optimistic to-dos in here. Sorry, the add optimistic, if I can spell mystic to-dos in here. I don't remember add optimistic. You see that type is already done for you, which is amazing. Add optimistic to-dos. We jump back down to the button, head back down here, and then let's say add optimistic to-dos, see what we need to give it. Data is this ... to do, and then completed is not to do dot completed, and then we add in the action, which is update, all with type safety. And now you'll see we've probably got one error because we haven't passed it to the to do component. And all we do here is now add that add optimistic to do is add optimistic to do. And now with any luck, look at that. I mean, to me, this is just, it's crazy how fast that is. Yeah, it looks terrible. It's not great. We'd probably want this to be ordered by the time it's created at, things like that. But it shows you we didn't have to think about boilerplate. We didn't have to think about how does any of this work really under the hood. We just think, all right, I want to toggle my to-do and I'll make a button and the rest of it's done. So yeah, this was a lot longer than I had expected, but I hope this helps understand Kirimase and everything that it's doing under the hood. I think it's insanely powerful, and I'm really enjoying building with it. If you've got any questions, jump into our Discord, open an issue on GitHub. yeah, reach out to me on Twitter. We'd love to talk to you about this kind of stuff. And as you can see, it's a service with a lot of rough edges. It's very new, and it's really me working on it. So please be patient with some of these bugs and errors, particularly as we're gluing together a lot of different pieces of infrastructure. But yeah, I think you'll really enjoy